Nagy szeretettel köszöntöm a jelenlevőket, és nagy szeretettel köszöntelek téged is, Janne. Örülök, hogy együtt fogunk beszélgetni, nagy tisztelője vagyok a munkásságodnak, és pszichológusként, pszichológiai szempontból érdekel engem rengeteg minden.
Well, thank you very much and good evening. I look forward to this conversation also. I'll be very curious about your questions. And good evening to everyone. I'm happy to be back in Budapest.
Amikor a könyveidet olvastam, akkor a legmarkánsabb kérdés, ami bennem megfogalmazódott, az az, hogy hát honnan tud ez a csaj ennyi mindent a pszichológiáról, a belső mozgatórugókról, a karaktereknek a fejlődéséről, a kamaszlélekről, az agresszió kezeléséről, megnyilvánulásáról, és az volt az első dolgom, hogy megnéztem, hogy milyen tanulmányaid vannak, és amikor azt láttam, hogy közgazdaságtan, jog, gazdasági, politikai tanácsadás, és 31 évesen ugye kezdtél neki írni, akkor egyszerűen azt mondtam, hogy ezt nem hiszem el, hogy te nem tanultál pszichológiát, hogy hogyan is van ezzel, hogyan is vagy ezzel, hogy honnan tudsz annyi mindent a léleknek a titkairól.
Well, thank you. That's a compliment from a specialist. The thing is, I probably could not pronounce, any of the psychological theories or analysis that you then see. The way I work as a writer, and I think many writers work, that is, you try to think as your characters. So when I write a book, I have to forget myself and become every single one of the characters I invent, because I write real fiction, it's not from my life. But then I always think, okay, like in Semmi, how would a boy who's 14-year-old and thinks nothing matters, how would he behave? And how would then each of them react if they have these characteristics? And then I look at the situation, and it's basically just a feeling in the stomach. So I cannot explain the psychology, it's just, okay, this is what would be natural if I was this person.
Ez nagyon érdekes, amit mondasz, hiszen Máté Gábor mondja azt, hogy az eszünket át lehet verni. A gondolatok azok mindig jönnek, mennek, meg tudjuk győzni magunkat erről is, arról is, az érzések is folyamatosan változnak, de a gyomrunk nem tanult meg hazudni. Úgyhogy valószínűleg, hogy a gyomrunkon keresztül is rengeteg mindent megérzünk, megértünk, és hogy nagyon jól érzed ezeket a karaktereket, és tényleg az az érzésem, és szerintem a mások nevében is beszélhetek, érzésünk, hogy valóban bele tudtál bújni ezeknek a karaktereknek a bőrében. Na és hoztam néhány gondolatot tőled, és ezek olyanok, mint olyan eszenciák, amit akár Jung is írhatott volna, úgyhogy szerintem, hogyha nem írjuk mellé a nevedet, akkor ez egy olyan nagyon ilyen pszichológiás, ilyen felismerések, ráismerések. Például nekem a kedvencem az összes gondolatot közül az, hogy néha a saját szívemben sincs elég hely magamnak. Hogy ez egy annyira gyönyörű gondolat. Vagy ha az ember megnyeri a harcot a múltért, akkor az övé a jövő is. Meg még egy, túl lehet élni, amit mások követnek el ellenünk, de azt nem, amit mi csinálunk másokkal. Hogy honnan is vannak ezek a felismerések, vagy hogyan is tudod ennyire tűpontosan megfogalmazni ezt a lényeget. Mert hogy a könyveidre az nagyon jellemző, hogy tömören, keményen, és ugye a lényeget kiemelve írsz.
It's again, it's something that I cannot do, you can say, from an academic angle. I can write about economics from an academic, very conscious angle, but not this kind. I have to, again, be the characters, be in the story. And of course I built on, you can say, some experiences I've had myself and what I learned from them, what I felt, but which doesn't mean that it's the same experiences in the book. It's just, okay, this looks like it. I mean, and then I extrapolate, or And for example, this thing with that, okay, you can survive what others do to you, but not what you do to others. I mean, it follows slightly from some experience I've had working. I worked for United Nations before I was writing full time, and worked also with the peace processes, and have seen a lot of quite horrible things, and have been attacked myself a number of times. And I just think any sane person has a natural conscience also. And you are the same person if others do bad things to you, but you are not the same if you have done things to others. That you have to carry that with you. And somehow it becomes very important, because if this is a quote from my most recent book, Come, with this title in Hungarian I can't pronounce.
Yeah.
And it was just very natural. This is, you know, how this woman who has gone through some horrible experiences look at life. It's her way to survive. And often what I like, I mean, not in all my books, but many of them, is to try to write very big stories in a way simple language, and as compressed as possible. So almost to work like poets do. You see, how many words can you take out of the story but still tell what is necessary? Because my sense is that literature comes alive in the mind of the reader. It's not if you look at the page, it could be a legal manual or, you know, a description of the motor of your car. The letters are the same. And it's only when the reader imagines what is written that then it's alive, it becomes a story. And I think the more I can give to the reader's imagination instead of imposing my imagination, the more, the stronger the story becomes. So it's a bit of it actually takes longer often to write the big story with few words rather than to use many words.
Amire kíváncsi vagyok, hogy hogyan telik el egy napod, hogyan írsz, hogyan vagy benne a fikcióban, a valóságban, hiszen a valóságban ugye vannak dolgaink, néha kell főzni, néha vannak ilyen mindennapi dolgok, és hogy tudsz bele menni ugye az írásba, és onnan kiszállni, hiszen írod többször, az interjúkat olvasva, és mondod, hogy teljesen belebújsz a karakterek bőrébe, és olykor nehéz a realitásba kiszállni, és a minden könyvedben írod azt is, hogy az íráshoz valószínűleg kicsit őrültnek kell lenni, hogy ezt például vallod, ezt a gondolatot?
Well, probably other people are the ones who should testify this, but I will say I don't always feel sane or belonging in the reality, but I have learned to work more at it, that I have to be more conscious, because actually when I wrote the book Macska Körom, I did lose my mind in the sense I woke up one day not knowing who I was. I mean, for real, like a real amnesia. And I didn't know where I was. And then I found this book on the table that was a diary, and I could see a name, and I realized, okay, this is my name. And then I could find a telephone number, and I remembered that's my sister's number. And I called and I said, something is really wrong. And she could take me to a psychologist who actually could help me see that I had become totally immersed with my character. And you know, the main character in Macska Körom is a Jamaican or internationalized war surgeon, very different from me, male also. And it was just, I had forgotten my own life. And also very basic things, like standing at a traffic light. I knew there were rules here with these colors, and you have to do something, but I wasn't sure what the rules were. I was looking at other people. And so many things I had to relearn totally. And through the process of slowly coming back to myself with the help of a psychologist, I also learned, I mean, and she really told me, I had to be sure I came back to myself, you know, out of the characters and back to myself every evening or every day. So where I used to write thinking I could just stay in these universes, but it is dangerous for the mind. I don't know how actors do it, because they do in a way a bit the same, but often have to, I guess, stay in a character for a long while. But anyway, I learned I can't stay in that mind, you know. But in a way, it was an interesting experience now when I'm on the other side of it. But I can't do it again. It's too dangerous. But maybe I should tell then, yeah. So nowadays, for me, it's very much about then rituals. I've lived in lots of big cities and moved around a lot, but now I moved back to the Danish countryside. And I like in the morning when I get up just to go out in my garden and look at, I have roses that I like to keep, making the coffee, you know, clear off the house. And then I work from the morning. I'm best in the morning. My head is not polluted yet. And if I'm in the middle of the book, I might write 3, 4, 5 hours. Generally, I can't write more than that, because it's really like being so concentrated, like overusing a muscle. So the brain gets tired, and then I can do other things, answer emails or clean the house. And like 7 years ago, I bought a horse. I love horses. I love animals in general, but horses particularly. But I hadn't been riding, you know, for years when I was moving around as a grown-up. But I realized that for me, I don't have children, and it's very important that the reality demands something of me every day. And since my horses are quite a wild Arabian, I cannot go and ride and think of my story or something else. I will fall off, and she will run off. But you know, the fact to go to a horse every day and go riding in the forest, that helps me be in reality. So it has taken me years, but I've learned that I must stay enough in reality or things go really wrong.
Igen, hát ez nem egy könnyű folyamat, ugye kint is, bent is lenni magában a cselekményben, és az is kérdésként fogalmazódott meg bennem, hogy ugye terapeutaként fontos, hogy miután a kliensnek a történetében benne vagy, hogy azt le tud tenni, és kérdésem az, hogy te miután leadod a regényt, és ugye megjelenik, hogy utána le tudod ezt tenni, vagy még tovább él benned az a karakter, vagy úgy folytatod gondolatban, vagy visszatérnek ezek az érzések, hogy ezt például, hogy hogyan csinálod.
It's been a bit different, you know, depending on the books, but generally I only give the book to the publisher when I feel, okay, I cannot make it any better, you know, and it's really finished. I'm not someone who gives half a draft and then work with the publisher. But of course, there'll still be some edits, something maybe I've overlooked, or dates I mix up, or there can be things also like I feel I have them in my head, it's evident, but it's not on the page. And particularly also because, yeah, I write through so many times the manuscript that sometimes I might have forgotten what I've taken out or put in. So then an editor can be very essential. But what is really for me the challenge is, yeah, when I then have given in the book that maybe I worked on for a number of years, I cannot just, if I sit like with the editor and we discuss it, I will tend to say whenever they suggest something, I say, no, I don't think so. It's only when I then go home and I go totally in the story, then I know what can be done or not. It's again this, I have to go back and become the characters to see what can feel right, or also, yeah, if there's some information that has to be in there, but I don't know where to put it, I have to feel my way through the entire novel to see, okay, this is where it fits. So it's both an exhausting and very time-consuming process. But I cannot, if I'm outside that universe, I cannot in my head figure out what is right or wrong. So whatever I decide in that, you know, like in a meeting, it's generally wrong. But I have learned that. In the beginning, you know, I didn't really know. But now over time, I know that's my process. So I just take note okay, so this is what the editor thinks, and I say, okay, I go home and I see how I'll work on it.
Írod, hogy amit még nem írtam meg, arról nem beszélek. A szavak, amelyek elhagyják a szánkat, csupán egydimenziós vonalak, nincsenek sorok, amelyek közé beférkőzhetne az élet. Hogy ez valóban így is van-e a saját életedben, hogy amiről nem írsz, arról nem beszélsz, vagy van-e valaki, akivel meg szoktad beszélni akár azokat a témákat, amelyek érdekelnek?
Yes, I always write about things I don't understand myself. So, I mean, there can be many different things, of course, from the meaning of life in Semmi, or each of the stories in Minden have their own subject, from human trafficking or multicultural identity, Matchka Kurum. It was this thought, okay, can we kill our own emotions? Because it's about, this man who loves desperately a woman he can't get because she's married with someone else, and he sets out to kill his own emotions. And I wanted to look at both if it's possible to kill your own very strong emotions, but also what happens to you when you do it or try to do it. And that's one side of that novel, and the other part was I was interested in looking at the mechanisms in a genocide or a civil war, and what happens, when neighbors kill each other. Because of course it's not like you wake up one day and kill somebody you've gone to school with. There's a long process of manipulation, and I was just trying to get into it, both because I'd been working with this in the United Nations, but also at the time there was a war in the Balkans, and I think that was my generation's terrible European war, the first time we had war in my lifetime in Europe. So I really felt I needed to write from this. Also, my mother's from Austria, and from the border to Slovenia, it's very Slavic, so it felt very close by. So like that, for each book there's a new theme. In the latest one, Gera, if I say it correctly, it's about ethics in the modern world. Is it at all possible still to take ethical decisions in a competition-driven world? And or how do we do it? What are the costs if we do it or not? Also to ourselves, to our souls, to our harmony with ourselves. And it's told through a publisher who sits on the eve and has to decide whether or not to publish a book by a best-selling author. That he finds out it's written on the basis of a very gruesome story from a woman who doesn't want it to be made public, and she has also some reasons for this. And suddenly he has to decide, in a situation where the income from this book has already been calculated into share prices. It happens to be his father-in-law who is the main shareholder, and so his whole life is mixed into this story, but also in literature traditionally, any kind of transgression is considered just interesting and courageous, and everyone, famous writers also have written about their family, from Thomas Mann, Proust, and so on. So how can he suddenly say, okay, I want to take consideration of this woman, but still, he's also a human being in the real world. And so I try to figure out, simply what is the ethically right thing in this situation, and how can you decide when there are such contradictions in a dilemma. So generally it's always, I search for something that of course have no clear answers, but you can, by writing a story about it, you get a little closer to understanding the questions or the problem, and maybe find an answer for yourself in some ways. I mean, there are no clear answers, but for me at least, then it's like afterwards I've written the book and maybe discussed it with people, and at some point I find, okay, this is where, can I say, the core of the matter lies. So I feel now I can move on. I've understood this. But there are still so many things that I don't understand, so I don't think I will run out of subjects to write about.
Ahogy hallgatlak, Teljesen az az érzésem, hogy az írás számodra egy ilyen nagyon mély önismereti folyamat, ahol folyamatosan vizsgálod, elemzed magad, a világhoz való viszonyod. És hát ez kapcsolódik a következő kérdésem, hogy hogyan élted meg azt, amikor betiltották a könyvedet. Nagyon sok író egy ilyen helyzetben ezt egy ilyen nagyon erős, ilyen önbecsülési kérdésként értékelni, és azt mondaná, na jó, hát akkor, hogyha nem tetszik nektek, akkor többet nem írok. És hogyan élted meg azt, hogy ahogy olvastam, hogy pszichológusok és pedagógusok is neked feszültek, és konkrétan azt is mondták, hogy ezt a könyvet azért is kell betiltani, mert hogyha elolvassák a fiatalok, akkor gyakorlatilag öngyilkosok is lehetnek. Na hát ez egy ilyen meredek kijelentés volt, és hogy milyen érzésed volt ezzel kapcsolatosan, meg hogyan tudtál érvelni, vagy hogyan tudtál tovább menni. Hát jó, egészen addig, hogy elvezetett az út, hogy ugye több díjat is megnyertél, meg utána kötelező olvasmány lett. Tehát, hogy ezt az érzelmi hullámvasutat kíváncsi vagyok, hogy hogyan élted meg. És ez mennyi idő telt el így a két dolog között?
Yeah, it was quite difficult because Semmi, was my second book only, and I'd written a big Nordic saga first. That's less controversial, or at the time was, and then it was just. I'm normally, a writer for grown-ups. I was thinking, but a publishing house asked if I would write a book for young adults. And I thought, no, it doesn't interest me. But then I got this idea of Pierre Anton in the tree, thinking, oh, nothing matters, and then it's not worth doing anything, and that leads to this full story. But I never wrote it to shock anyone. I really wrote it because I myself was on the lookout for the meaning of life. And once I imagined Pierre Anton in this tree and thinking nothing matters, I thought, what will his friends do when one classmate does that? And I knew I had a book I had to write. So afterwards, what happened was that I sent it to the publisher that had asked me to write the book, but even though they had asked me themselves, they said, no, this book is too strange, we can't publish it. And then I was, what did I know? So I went to my other publisher, and also they said, well, it's not an interest, but it's not quite for us. I said, no, we can't publish this one. And I talked to a few people, and it was the same thing I heard. So I put it in a drawer, and I thought, maybe I don't understand, because I have no children, and my nieces and nephews were too young to read something like this at the time, so maybe I've got it all wrong. And then a month passed, and then they called actually from the first publishing house again, and said one of the teenage daughters of one of the editors in the publishing house had read it and loved it, so they wanted now to try to publish it as a chance. And then, okay, yeah, it had not sold very many copies after a couple of years, but it got suddenly that big prize. And it was the same time, because suddenly it got the attention when it got the prize. It was of the Danish Cultural Minister for Best Children's Books in that year. So then a lot of people were starting to read it, and that's when I got all the attacks. Everyone, not everyone, but a lot of people were saying, oh, you shouldn't have the prize for this book, it's dangerous, and as you were saying, for young people. And I had no idea how to respond, because again, for me, it was always a tale. Maybe not like the fairy tales you translate, but it might look, realistic on the, when you immediately read, but it's not. If one thinks about what really happens, it's not quite realistic. The boy who stays in the tree for months and months, and the way it's told is also a bit like a tale. So for me, it was always a tale, and I couldn't understand it could provoke people so much. And then some would say, oh, there's so much violence, and I thought, but there's much less violence than all the vampire books that children were reading at that time. And there was not really any bad language. The few swear words I have invented myself, and they're not so bad. And I didn't understand it that in Western Europe, in this century, it could be so provoking to ask, these big questions in life. And it took many years before I started to understand it. And in the between period, for a while, I was like, I disowned the book. When people asked what books I had written, I never mentioned it. It was almost, I can't say I was ashamed of it, but it was a feeling I had gotten something wrong that I couldn't quite understand what had happened. And then slowly, luckily, there were some teachers and librarians who realized that young people love to read the book and anyway have those questions, and they had very good discussion in the classes with the students. And slowly it spread. It became more accepted, yes, to come to be on the curriculum and be translated a lot. I think now it's 36 languages it's in and keeps spreading. But yeah, it took many years. It's 23 years ago I wrote the book. And so now what has happened in a way is it was slowly like I took back the book as it became more accepted. And I was happy to see, yes, I was right about that all over the world, we all as human beings carry these questions of the meaning of life. They are absolutely basic. And both teenagers, grown-ups, poor people, rich people, we have those questions in common. And we might not want to think about them or believe we have an answer, but we can't answer them. We can only find a way to live with them and believe, whether we believe in God or in the Big Bang, and it's all belief, because we don't know why we are here and what happens when we die, and we probably will never know. But it's also fine. It's like you have to just open the door to that. It's okay, we can't answer. But anyway, to come back, it was like, I can't say like a vindication is the wrong word, but it's just I've been very happy, maybe particularly because the book went through so much resistance. I've been very happy to see, well, I was right, feeling that stomach feeling, because I always think the stomach feeling tells me something that is universal for human beings. And that is that these questions really are important for everybody.
Igen, pontosan, hát akkor szoktunk ennyire felháborodni, amikor valaki olyan kérdéseket tesz fel, amelyek bennünket is személyesen érintenek és zavarnak, és akkor persze, hogy dühösek vagyunk arra, aki felteszi azt a kérdést, mert akkor erre kell válaszoljunk, vagy legalább kell foglalkozzunk vele, és sokkal könnyebb azt mondani, hogy ezt nem kellett volna megírni, és különben is nagyon veszélyes. Hogy mennyire foglalkoztatnak bennünket ezek a kérdések, az pont az mutatja, hogy a napokban a barátnőm írt nekem egy levelet a kisfiáról, és azt szeretném elolvasni neked, ezt a pár sort, hogy milyen gondolatok foglalkoztatják, ami pontosan ugye erről szól. A fiam megint utálja az iskolát. Nem zaklatják, nincs baj, csak azt mondja, hogy nem mindenki jó ember. És a tanárok kiabálnak, unottak, idősek. Őt szeretik, de ő akkor sem szereti az iskolát. Legszívesebben nem menne. És úgy érzi, ebből nincs menekvés. Most az iskola teszi tönkre, aztán jön a patkánycsapda. Ezt mondja a munkával. Hiába dolgozik, 30% adót be kell fizetni, és nem hiszi el, hogy ennyiből áll az élet. Épp most tanulnak az adózásról, törvényekről. Suli és munka. És ez őt nem teszi boldoggá. Ez egy Svédországban élő 6. osztályos kisfiú, aki végül is ugyanazokat a kérdéseket teszi fel, hogy milyen értelme van ugye ezeknek a dolgoknak, és mit gondolsz arról, hogy mi felnőttként, szülőként, pedagógusként mit mondhatunk, mit csinálhatunk, milyen mintát követhetünk. Mert azt látom, amikor én iskolapszichológusként dolgoztam, és 7.-8. diákoknak tartottam pályaválasztási tanácsadást, ugyanezeket a kérdéseket tették fel, sőt, nagyon keményen szembesítettek azzal, hogy én nem akarok felnőtt lenni, mert a felnőttek olyan unalmasak, a felnőttek ki vannak égve, nem akarnak ehhez a világhoz tartozni, nincs követhető mintájuk. És nagyon gyakran szavak nélkül maradtam, nem tudtam mit mondani nekik.
No, I think it's right. There are, of course, no clear answers, because we have to accept we live in the society as it is today, and we might want to do certain things differently to save the climate, particularly. But I think one cannot just suddenly say, okay, we go and live in an island and don't belong in this world, or so it's somehow to find a road that makes sense in the existing world. I don't know, the discussions I've had with young people since I wrote Nothing, and I've discussed with people everywhere, I've actually been quite impressed, because we often feel, oh, they only want to be famous and have many likes on Facebook, they don't care about anything. But when you really talk to them, they all know that it doesn't really give any meaning to their lives. It's just something, okay, that's what you run for right now. They do look for something deeper, they just don't know where to find it. And I think the most important experience I've had is they are happy when, as an adult, you also say you don't have the answers. Because part of the problem is that many young people feel, oh, they're kind of told what the answer should be, but they always know none of the answers they're given, oh, it's important to have a nice title or earn a lot of money, you know, gives meaning at a deeper level, and it gives enough meaning. So when at least you can have an open discussion about that, and you can try to talk about, you know, how to go about it, how to address it, and as an adult who still don't know the answers, it helps a lot, I feel. And also to give each of them a feeling that life matters even when you're not seen by everybody. Because in today's world, it's almost like, okay, only the very famous one or those who become number one in something are important. Because that's what society, or we all maybe convey to the young people. But of course, that isn't true. Because if it were true, then 99% of us here could go home and forget to live on, because we wouldn't matter. I think life in itself matters. We may not know why we are here, but the very fact that we've been given this gift of life by someone we have no clue who is, then just means it's important to be alive, and we don't have to do anything but just what we think is the best with our lives. Live from the inside instead of trying to become somebody in other people's eyes, because you can't feel eventually the eyes of the other. It's not in your memory of what you experience in life. What you experience is what you see. You experience what you feel, what you taste. You don't experience this strange thing of the others putting likes on your thing. It's something the other one experiences. You experience what you like. And it's somehow to change that around. And I feel when I discuss these things with young people, okay, they get it at some point. And also all of those who may not get big educations or become pop singers or whatever, each one matter. And I think that is what is really important to convey to all the young people today.
Én is azt gondolom, hogy a kapcsolat az, hogy egyáltalán elmerem fogadni a gyereknek ezt az érzését, és nem kezdem el bagatelizálni, hogy ez nem is kérdés, és különben is miért kell erről gondolkodni, mert vannak ennél fontosabb dolgok. Vagy akár az, hogy felnőttként nem félistennek akarok látszani, aki minden választ tud, hanem megmerem mutatni azt, hogy én magam is helyzetekben tehetetlen vagyok, vannak kérdéseim, és hogy ez teljesen normális, hogy kérdéseket teszek fel, és akár önmagamat is meg tudom kérdőjelezni. Azt írod, hogy a minden regényed a fejlődésben levő szellem hangján íródott. Ez a hang a kamaszkor táján szólal meg először, és ideális esetben soha nem némul el. És szerinted mi az a fiatal felnőtt hang, és mit akarna mondani ennek a világnak?
Okay, I didn't quite say the voice, because each book for me has its own voice. But you think about what my stomach wants to say? Okay.
Yes.
I think generally with my books, I'm always on a journey of discovery. And my hope is always, okay, if I do it well enough, then the reader will experience what I experience through the writing. And I believe fiction is an amazing way to get all the life experiences and life learning that we can't get in our own lives, because we have only one life. We live in a certain situation and have certain experiences. But literature is an amazing way to live all these other lives. And I always think the best learning we do get is through experiences. But we can't have all experiences, so literature is the way to have it. And for example, in Semmi, I mean, you don't want any child to go through what these children go through in the book. You don't want yourself to go through it. But it's quite interesting to live through it in your mind and emotionally. You can come out on the other side. And luckily, you haven't done all the gruesome things that the children do in the book, but you find what they find. You know, they do find there's a meaning, even if they can't quite formulate how it is. And at least for me, that's the experience I had when I had written it, and also I hear from many readers that feeling stays with them. But luckily, we can enjoy it because we haven't done those things, because I think the kids in the book can never enjoy what they found because they had committed this gruesome act. And I think it's the same for each of my books. I don't believe that I can sit and tell anyone how to think or what to think. But if you discover something through, if I discover this thing through the story and the different characters, hopefully each person, each reader will think about it for themselves. And I strongly believe that all human beings have an inner compass for right and wrong, like a human ethical compass. It gets destroyed when we have to think and follow conventions around us or group pressure. I think it gets destroyed to an extent that we don't even hear it or know it's there. But through literature, you sit alone, nobody's watching you, you're alone with the book and that universe. It makes you feel again that compass. You take off what I consider like the coat of all your identities, your culture, and you become one with the universe of the book. And so it's a very honest place to be for your soul. And it's also a vulnerable place, but it's okay to be vulnerable with a book because it's not something you do for anybody else to watch or interfere with. But that's also why it can be almost dangerous, this thing, because you reach that deeper compass of you, so okay, maybe I have done what this character has done and it's actually not a good thing. And you can feel that in another way in literature. But it also means that whenever you finish a book that takes you through this process, you come out a little bit wiser. Your compass become a little bit stronger. And also you have to feel it. You cannot so easily run away from it. And so I prefer all the time, to add to my own compass through the writing, and hopefully to add through the reader's compass in it. But thereafter it's their own voice that will tell them. It's not that I tell, okay, this is how you have to think. Each one can find it in themselves, I think.
A lelki egészségünk egyik fontos feltétele az, hogy meg tudjuk őrizni magunkban ezt a belső csodagyereket, ahogy Jung nevezi, aki kreatív, aki derűs, aki örül az életnek, aki egy kicsit ilyen életbátorsággal megy neki a dolgoknak. És mit gondolsz arról, hogy ezt felnőttként hogyan tudjuk megtartani? Ugye Pierre Anton is azt mondja, hogy megfogadtuk, hogy mi sose fogunk rájuk hasonlítani, de pontosan ez lesz a helyzet. Tehát, hogy néha elveszítjük ezt a belső gyereket, és hogy felnőttként mit tehetünk azért, hogy valahogy oda tudjunk fordulni felé, és akár majd áttérünk egy kicsit a háborús kérdésekhez is, hogy nehéz helyzetekben meg is tudjuk óvni ezt a belső sérülékeny gyerekünket.
Yes, it's of course easy to say things for those who have, simple life, wealthy, and have lots of choices. Because then it's easy to stay curious, you easily can have new experiences. The funny thing is still those people often are bored, which you see in the Semmi, they are quite wealthy, middle class, even if it's in the countryside. They have no problems of lack of food or security, school is free and so on. But that sometimes also, that safety makes us lose the sense of meaning. It's very seldom when you see people who have to struggle that they, have even the time to feel that life is meaningless, because you really, you're struggling to find food or shelter for tomorrow, or warmth, or whatever, water, what you need. And I think that it is a challenge as a grown-up to stay curious about life. In a way, it should be quite simple, because if one just stays open to all the things that we don't know, there's so much to be curious about. I mean, like a little child who still hasn't seen much of the world, there's still so much we don't know. But I think it's also because often the way we are told things are in very either boring or academic language that seems so far off. Whereas, it's the near experiences that are interesting, and to learn through them. So it's somehow also to get back to that. Why is life interesting? Even if we have a very boring job, 8 hours a day, still there are moments where you can pick up on this, that life can be interesting. But of course, you are then more vulnerable if you are in a threatened situation, like in a war. And yet, I think part of surviving as a human being in a gruesome situation is to allow that, you can say, child in yourself to stay alive. And maybe if I may tell an anecdote, when I was working in Mozambique in 93, 94, for the United Nations peace process. It was after the country had been 17 years in a horrible civil war, where people had gotten noses and breasts cut off or ears or buried alive. And most villages had been just burned down. People had gathered around, the cities and shelter. There were 4 million people who were refugees. And even though there was a ceasefire when I moved there with the UN, there were still a lot of gruesome things happening. And because I was the right hand of the head of the peacekeeping mission, I had every day to look through all the reports of, the torture or the incidents of people killed in the country to see which one was breaking the ceasefire, which was just, normal violence. And through that, just reading through or seeing things, I totally lost my belief in humanity. And I got, very seriously depressed and thinking, it doesn't really matter. And even if we make peace, human beings are just horrible anyhow. And I had brought a lot of books with me, because at the time there were no bookstores in Mozambique. But I didn't feel like reading, because when you see so many gruesome things happening, it feels reading really makes no sense. And then a friend of mine who was just passing through Mozambique, he gave me a big book called Norton's Anthology of English Literature. And there are 2 actually of them, but he could only carry 1, they're quite heavy. So I got from, I think, 1830 to 1950 or something, but mostly it's poetry in the English language. And kind of just to be polite, I was looking up and I found the shortest poem in the book was from, it was called The Walk from Thomas Hardy, written in 1914 when his wife died. And it's absolutely nothing to do with Mozambique or the war or anything, but somehow when I had learned it by heart and could say it out loud to myself, it just gave me a little bit of energy, a little bit of hope for life. And I've never before memorized poetry, so I don't even know how the idea came to me to not just read it, but to say it enough times or read it enough times that in the end I could say it by heart. And it's not a tradition we have in Denmark, reciting poetry either. So, but it's just then I kept going on because it was like I was looking for that feeling, and it was poetry that I probably would not have read much of otherwise. Even some of it is classical, you know, Yeats or Keats, Emily Bronte, Dickinson, and so on. But it was just that thing of, if every day I kept working on this poetry and had it in my mind, I could much better meet, you know, the demands of my work and the world around me, the violence around me. So just slowly, over the days as I did this, I got my, you know, my energy back and my positivity, or belief in hope, and then later I could go and read novels also again. And through this, what I really felt was good literature, as I think any good art probably, is like a letter from the soul of the artist to the soul of the recipient. And it was so essential for me. I've never since then been in doubt about the importance of art, because it was really like food for my soul and very concrete. And in a way also I think this is, yeah, feeding that inner child that must survive through very gruesome situations. And I've heard this also from people who have lived, you know, through the Iranian Revolution or other horrible situations, that, yeah, you find where you can have the essence of humanity because you need so much to be reminded of it and to be fed by it, whether some people find it maybe in religion, some people in music. But for me, definitely it was literature. And I think, in a way, a very boring job where we do the same thing every day, or if you're with colleagues who are nasty or so, it can be almost a sense of aggression or negativity as strong as in a war or in a crisis. So I think it's actually to remember to feed that vulnerable part of yourself, because it's the only way we can, you know, stay human in difficult circumstances. So yeah, that's for me also, of course, the challenge we have to remember this, that we are quite vulnerable, and if we let ourselves just float along with life, that's often where we lose that curiosity and the sense of what it's all about.
Mindig nagy kérdés bennem, hogy mit tehetünk a gyerekeinkkel egy ilyen helyzetben, amikor ugye háborúról is kell beszélgetni velük. Soha nem is gondoltam volna, hogy én valaha ilyen kérdésekről kell beszélgessek a jelen időben és nem a múltban. Emlékszem, amikor a kisiskolás lányommal sétáltam haza, és próbáltam neki elmagyarázni a dolgokat, akkor annyira sutának éreztem magam szavak nélkül, és akkor kezdtem neki mondani, hogy tudod, hogy van olyan, hogy az osztályban is két diák összeveszett, és van olyan is, amikor a családban is vannak konfliktusok, sőt, még magunkban is vannak konfliktusok, aztán rájöttem, kicsit túl messzire mentem, és aztán elkezdtem beszélni a háborúról, hogy valamikor két ország is összeveszik egymással, és akkor a háború, és akkor megkérdezte tőlem Lilla lányom, de anya, mi most hogy jutottunk el idáig? Na mondtam, jó, ez nem jó kezdet volt. Aztán utána, amikor próbáltam meginterjúvolni őket, hogy szerinted az anyukák mit mondjanak a gyerekeiknek, hogy nyugtassák meg őket, hogy nem is, hogy nem kell félni, hanem hogy ez a félelem túlélhető. És azt mondta nekem a kicsi lányom Zsolna, hogy anya, ez az apák dolga. Fú, mondtam, ez igen, válasz. És az a kérdésem, hogy hát ugye egy serdülő gyerekkel lehet ezekről a kérdésekről beszélni, de mi van az óvodás és kisiskoláskorú gyerekekkel? Mert én például azt gondolom, hogy úgy, mint az Élet szép című filmben, ugye a La vita è bella című filmben, amikor az apa a világháború borzalmait teszi mesélhetővé a gyereke számára, és a gyerek tényleg elhiszi, hogy pontokat kell gyűjteni, és lehet nyerni egy tankot, hogy valamilyen módon mégiscsak egy védőfalat kell húznunk a külső világ fenyegetettségei, ahogy mi megéljük, ahogy mi átdolgozzuk, és ahogy a gyerekeinkkel elkezdünk erről beszélni, hogy te ezt hogy látod?
I think it is important somehow, to communicate about the war to children when it's a reality, and you don't want suddenly that war is on their doorstep and they have never heard about it because you protect them so much that they don't know what happened. But I don't think there are any easy answers. And what do you say if you're the parent in Ukraine and your houses get bombed, and why are the Russians angry at them? And I think that depends on the children's age. But you do have to talk about it because it could be their reality. And I think fiction is a good way, because through stories, they can again have this experience and get nearer to what war is and what are the mechanisms, without it becoming so real that it feels dangerous. Because you can still say, okay, this is a story about war, but some people actually live through it, but this is just a story. And I do, in that book, I don't know the title in Hungarian, but the one, it's called War. It's written for teenagers, it's not for small children. But there I was trying to convey, what does it mean when you become a refugee, to lose your identity, to have to flee your country and maybe lose family members. But the real thing is about this, okay, what it does to you to have to leave everything behind and be in a new country. I adapt it to each country where it's published, so you can feel the whole idea of that story is exactly, if you live in a peaceful country where refugees are coming in, we always think it's the Iraqis or the Syrians, or now it's the Ukrainians fleeing, but it's not us, and particularly in a country like my own Denmark, there hasn't been war for many years, and not really big troubles either. So people cannot even imagine it could be what it would be to have to flee. So I feel again fiction can help, and you just make a Danish family having to flee to Egypt because of war in Scandinavia. I imagine the Balkans here in Scandinavia. And then for each country it's different. Here of course it's a Hungarian family. But just to make that little kind of imaginative story, it can allow the reader and the young reader also to think, okay, if it was me, how would it feel like? So that when they meet, because I'm sure also some of your children here meet Ukrainian refugees in school, and so it's not so strange. They can better think, okay, you're not just some foreigner who come here to take away jobs from us, but they realize, okay, they had to flee to stay alive, and it could be yourself. And this is not for small kids, this book. I think you have to be at least 12 or so to read it. But I can imagine you could write the same kind of story for very young children. I mean, children, even at a young age, 3 or 4, are quite sophisticated to understand stories. And I think stories is always a good way, you for each level to understand something. And it's always a slightly protected way to get into a subject, because eventually it's just a story.
Közben itt jeleztek, hogy lejárt a beszélgetésünk ideje, hogy hagyjunk még helyet a kérdéseknek. Te mondod azt, hogy a történeteknek legyen vidám a befejezésük, különben egyáltalán nincs végük. És hogy ezt egy ilyen pozitív résszel kerekítsük le. Én mindenképpen megkérdezném azt tőled, ami lényegében mindannyiunk kérdése élet középtáján, hogy az a gyerek, aki voltál, büszke lenne arra a felnőttre, akivé váltál.
No, well, I think that child would think I should have written many more books by now. so, but I'm still working on it.
Köszönjük, és most a közönségen a sor. Lehet kérdezni, hozzászólni. Nem tudom, ez technikailag hogy van, hogy odaér a mikrofon, akkor azokhoz, akik kérdeznének. Kézfelemeléssel lehet jelezni.
Azt mondta a beszélgetés során, hogy nem a saját gondolataimat akarom ráerőltetni az olvasóra, hanem azt akarom, hogy az olvasó fantáziája tegye élővé a karaktereket. És szeretném megtudni, hogy ezt milyen eszközökkel szeretné elérni. Tehát mit, hogyan.
I think it's just, you can say, the imagination to be someone else. And I mean, for me, it's very automatic. I did since I was a small kid. I always invented stories, and I think I was quite old before I realized not everybody does it. But that's then where those who don't can read the literature and get it that way. So I don't really have like tools or structure. Also, I don't teach writing, for example, because I don't even know how to say it. Because for me, it's just very natural. This is what I do. It's not saying it's easy, because many days I sit at home and it's not on paper how I would want it to be. But if I keep working on it, at some point it comes. But the main part is somewhere to be able to forget your own emotions and become your character and feel the emotions of your character. And that's whether, it's a 14-year-old boy or an old woman or, a war surgeon or it's each person. I have to feel them or I cannot make it work. And somehow, I can only see it's like I see the stories very much. It's very vivid for me, and it's just if I feel it's right, I hope it's right for the reader. That's kind of the only way I can explain it. I would have no clue how to put it in other terms than that.
Beszélgetette már kamaszokkal mondjuk a Semmi című könyvéről, és ha igen, milyen érzés volt, vagy miket lehetett visszahallani tőlük, mint célközönség?
Yes, very often, and in many countries, and also here. Generally, we have very good discussions, and they are sometimes very provoked by the story and say, "Oh, these are crazy kids, or stupid kids, and terrible kids." But when you come down to it, they're all preoccupied with what happens, and you can often discuss both the individual events or sacrifices, like why is it such a bad thing for like Ursula to have the hair cut, for example, the one who has the hair colored blue. Why does the flag matter to one boy? It doesn't have to be just the dramatic things. Also, even the sandals for Agnes, why are they important? But the big discussion comes of how you understand then the story at the end is what is the meaning of life? And in my experience, even quite young children have really deep thoughts on it and understand that the book tells them that the meaning is not the same for everybody in this world, that they have to find their own meaning, but also that this thing of they have to respect, what they feel, they can't give it up, because the moment you give up what matters, and then it's, it can't matter in the same way afterwards. So like you sacrifice something, it's really sacrificed. And also you cannot, kill or hurt someone to try to find meaning. They do understand the story very well, is my feeling. And also what I found is young people have no problems to see the light in the book. That even if it has a gruesome ending, there's a hope in it. It's more sometimes grown up has more trouble seeing it, but not young people. I think it's because they know also they're at the state in life where they have to make choices about which roads they take, but everything is still open for them. So it's important to know what they value, otherwise they can't choose their where to go in life. Whereas we as grown-ups, we have chosen our roads, and even if we start questioning it and think, well, maybe I would have some other values today than I had when I was 20, we cannot redo the last 30 years. So it's much more provoking to open those questions of what is actually important to us. And then I've also heard many different interpretations of Pierre Anton. Some see him as Voltaire of enlightened men who opened the eyes of the others. Some see him even as a Jesus figure who sacrifices himself so the others can find meaning. It's not my interpretation, but I think it's fine. Some see him almost like a devil who is the reason that all these bad things happen. But then when you talk more and you see, well, actually, if the others were convinced that life has a meaning and what they're doing made sense, then they wouldn't care that Pierre Anton was sitting up there shouting. They see it's true. All he does is open the doubt that all the others also carry. And that's why they're so provoked by his shouting. So yeah, generally I really have very, very good deep discussions with young people about the book. And both they tell me and often have written to me things, that their way of thinking and looking at life has changed from before they read it to after. And yeah, generally that makes me happy because it's again, yeah, I didn't invent the existential questions of life. I put them in this story, but they can somehow help give the reader maybe a way to approach all these questions we can't answer.
Kétgyerekes anyaként ugye egyre inkább próbálom felkészíteni magam a kamaszkor nehézségeire, ami most már lassan itt liheg a nyakamba. És hát elég gyakran beszélek, vagy készítem magam, és a barátnőimmel közösen próbáljuk összegezni, hogy mik azok a feladatok, amik a későbbiekben ránk várnak. És annyira képesek megbotránkozni egyesek azon, hogy én felállítok gondolatban egy olyan listát a gyerekeim számára, hogy mik azok a művek, és akkor most értsünk ez alatt irodalmi alkotásokat, klasszikus filmeket, amiket mindenképp szeretném, hogyha fogyasztanának, és azokon keresztül okulnának. Ezek többnyire olyan kényes témák, amikről mi felnőttek és szülők kevésbé szeretünk beszélni, vagy éppenséggel nem tudjuk megfogni azt a lényeget, amit közvetíteni szükséges volna a gyerekek felé. És hát a Semmi alkotás az éppenséggel a listámon van. Úgyhogy tulajdonképpen ez most nem is egy kérdés lett, ami így megformálódott bennem, hanem jóformán egy köszönetnyilvánítás, hogy van egy ilyen alkotás, amit készen oda tudunk nyújtani a gyerekeinknek, és hát azt hiszem, hogy nyugton állíthatom, hogy besegít a nevelési procedúrába. Tehát köszönjük.
Well, thanks to you for that. Also, you're a courageous mother, because I think it is a difficult book to give to your own kids almost, because it is gruesome and it's strong. But yeah, I think young people need it somehow. But it takes courage to give it to your own kids, I think.
Az merült fel, hogy még a beszélgetés elején volt téma, hogy az író hogyan mozog fikciós terekben, és hogyan mozog a valóságban. És bennem az merült fel kérdésként, hogy az írónak akkor mi a pozíciója a társadalomban? Hogy akkor kérdéseket tesz fel, vagy akkor történeteket mond el, amiket kigondol, mert mások nem? vagy van egyáltalán bármi feladata, vagy csak pozíciója van, és egyáltalán lehet-e pozíciója, hogyha így tereket váltogat?
If you think in the old days, at the king's court, you know, when the king really had power, and he was the only one who had that power, and it was very dangerous to say anything to the king, because if he didn't like what you told him, even if it was true, you would lose your head. But one person could sometimes get away with saying things. That was a jester. And I think actually the role of a writer is that jester, that we may tell the king and the court some truth, and if we tell it in the right way, you know, we could stay alive, so, which is an advantage. But yeah, we are allowed, or you can say our way of working allows us to tell, you know, truths that are not always welcome, but that somehow can be allowed, where sometimes if you tell it very straight, it can seem, you know, both more violent and aggressive and create a conflict. But if you tell it through a story, it's again, yeah, people can take it in a little, you know, as they are ready for it. For a long while they might think, oh, it's just a story, but stories stay with us somehow and changes us slowly. And I know there's often this discussion, yeah, what is today's responsibility of a writer in society? And I think it's in a way just like every other person. A writer's responsibility is to, you know, do the best possible at what they can do, which means writing good books and the best they can. And even a good poem about nature says something political because it says something about what is important. And it might change the reader and the reader's perception of nature, and therefore, you know, in the secondary level has a political impact. So I think it's fine for any writer who doesn't want to be directly involved with politics then not to be, because it might not be what they're good at. I myself get involved in both activism and I write essays when I try to be in reality. But it's also because it's my background, it's what I studied, and I definitely don't think it's something all writers should do. I mean, there are also lots of individual people who are not writers who are very good at doing activism and changing the society very directly. Literature can only do it at the second level because it's through the reader that it might change over the long term the way the reader interact or sees society. So I think it's just different ways of having impact, and one has to just do what we are best at.
Csak azt szeretném megkérdezni, hogy neked vannak-e kedvenc szerzőid, és ha igen, akkor kik azok, és milyen regényeket szeretsz olvasni?
I have many, because, I mean, there are many great writers from all over the world, but some of those who have influenced my own writing the most, someone like Albert Camus or Knut Hamsun, the Norwegian writer, partly because I so admire their ability to write in quite short books of very big philosophical themes. They do this thing that I find interesting of inner story that might seem simple to go very, very deep. But there are also lots of other writers that I love, from Gogol, Dostoevsky, of course, Turgenev, and that I read at a certain period of time, then to Latin American, Garcia Marquez, to the Egyptian, Mahfouz, and I read with great interest some Hungarian writers. Unfortunately, not so many are translated, I found out, but yeah, I read Imre Kertész, of course. I have read Peter Nadash, and somebody, I can't say the name, Laszlo Krasnohorkai or something like that. It's really wild, really interesting wild mind, and which gives us this feeling there must be so much Hungarian literature that would be interesting to read, but there's not so much you can find in English or Danish. But then I read, in a strange way, I'm also quite influenced by old folk tales, the tales of H.C. Andersen. Again, I like this, almost, you know, when you can have a children's tale that then tells adults something very different or much deeper, this thing of writing at many levels. And for my book Mačka Körom, the style was very inspired by Faulkner, the American writer who wrote a lot of stream of consciousness. So it can be very different literature. I like good storytelling with a deep meaning. And there are, you know, many good writers who have done this.
Nekem a Semmi című filmről lenne kérdésem, hogy milyen érzés volt, ahogy a könyvet filmé csinálták, milyen volt ez a folyamat, és mennyire vett benne részt, és mennyire volt megelégedve a végső produktummal.
I think I was lucky in the sense that the film was made so many years after the book was published. If it had come earlier, I don't think I could even have seen the film, because you feel, of course, I mean, the book is, all the characters are like my children. I know how they look and how they act, and you cannot cut out one, you know, like killing a child. But over time, you know, the book has also been made into theater many times, and I become used to thinking, okay, the book exists, it's the original, but each piece of theater, it's like the film, it's the interpretation of the director. And so I have learned to see it doesn't have to be like the book. It's a different medium, and it's a different way to tell that story. So I went through, I was not working with the film people, but I did go through the book with the director when they got the rights. I explained, you know, my thinking, and, you know, I could see they wanted to make a film that would have the same spirit. I was very nervous about it, because I thought, you know, when I heard they were cutting out again a number of the characters in the book, putting certain ones together, the parents would be more present. I was not too happy with the idea of it. But then when I saw the film, I was actually really impressed. You know, the first half I was still disturbed. You know, there were certain sentences that were different, or a lot of things left out. But then I got into that way of telling the story, and I could see the feeling at the end is quite close to when you close the book. You think, what happened here? You know, and you have to start thinking. And I think they've done a really good job with the film. But also I know that it could have been made in many other ways, and probably given that same feeling. So mostly I'm impressed actually by all the young actors. Many of them are just amateur actors. They're 13, 14 years old when they made this, or 15, and I think they do really a good job. But for me, yes, it's a different thing. It's an interpretation, and, you know, like there are many theater plays that are different. Maybe there'll be another film that will show it in a different way, and so it's okay.
Én azt szeretném kérdezni, hogyha egyidős lenne a Semmiben szereplő gyerekekkel, és szerepelne a könyvben, akkor mit adott volna a fontos dolgok halmába?
Well, if I could choose myself, at the time I would probably have put a horse. I mean, but hopefully, you know, not a live horse, maybe the symbolic impression of a horse. And today I would put the book Nothing, because it has changed how I look at life. So in that sense, it's become very important for me, and not just because it also, of course, helps to pay my my rent, and which any writer will know is essential in itself. But it has changed how I look at life. So therefore, it should go on the heap of meaning.
Én is kérdeznék egyet. Én kérdeznék egyet. Hogy ugye készült egy nagyon nagy sikerű bábszínházi adaptációja a Semminek, amit Magyarországon az év legjobb gyerekszínházi előadását is elnyerte, és ha jól tudom, ezt látta, és találkozott is az alkotókkal, hogy tetszett ez az előadás, milyen benyomást tett önre?
Yes, I haven't seen the actual theatre. I never watched the theatres because for me it's very strange. It's like a schizophrenic feeling when it's like the story I invented and the words come out of the mouth of someone who looks different than they do inside my head, of course, because my imagination is different. So I just never see it. But I know they have had this great success with it. And what happened was once when I was in Budapest for I think the book fair some years back, the director and some of his people came with bringing the dolls to the festival, and that was very emotional to see, because they're very well made, and to see Pierre Anton and Agnes and some of the others in this shape, and they do look a lot how they're described, in the book, and you can feel their characters and how they look. And then, I saw how they work with some of it, and talked to the actors behind it. I came to the theater, and I mean, it was very impressive, very emotional. And it's, that's their interpretation, but somehow I hadn't even realized how a doll's theater or puppet theater could be so strong. But it's almost like, because of the innocence from puppets, it makes you more vulnerable, that you live with them. So I'm very glad they're still playing it, and I'm very impressed with it.
Kedves közönségünk, sajnos minden jónak egyszer vége szakad, úgy, ahogy ennek a beszélgetésnek is, úgyhogy szeretnék egy nagy tapsot kérni Janne Tellernek és Thank you very much for coming. It's a pleasure having you here at the PesText Fesztivál. Thank you very much.
Thank you.